Okay, first thing we're going to do is I am using a chuck roast. And I think it's really important to season your pot roast right from the start. Generously season it. This is about a 2.5-pound roast. So it's a big piece of meat. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is they just don't season it enough. I always get my meat, or I try to, wrapped in butcher paper. I think it's just stays fresher that way. And the folks at Festival are super great about it. Just ask them, they'd be happy to do it for you. And that way, if you decide to freeze it, you've got that extra bit of insulation, and then when you're working with it, you don't need to dirty another dish. You know, you can just kind of deal with it right on the paper. So we're going to season this with garlic salt and black pepper. Salt and pepper would work fine too, but I grew up with garlic salt. Just got some more flavor in it, and it's a great way to get some garlic flavor in your recipe without having to, you know, with pot roast, with, you know, having to deal with fresh garlic and things like that. So black pepper. Lots of garlic salt. My mom, we always had garlic salt in the family. You know, that was before you know, back in the day, we didn't use fresh herbs or, you know, fresh garlic. We just would use onion powder and garlic salt and that kind of stuff. So when you're in a hurry, garlic salt works great. Got a nice big skillet, and this skillet's great because actually it can go in the oven. So I'm taking the time to get a little color, brown up this pot roast. So this is nice. I kind of was able to season it all up and work with it in this paper and then just throw it away. No mess. And I want to season both sides. So again, we want to generously season the pot roast. So this is more garlic salt, more black pepper. Now there are times when, you know, you don't have time to brown up your pot roast. You're just going to throw it right in the slow cooker. And you know what? That works great too. Again, season it, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the cooking liquid that you're going to be braising that pot roast in, because that is so important when it comes to flavor. But if you do have an extra 5-10 minutes in the morning to brown up that roast, wow, it just makes a really big difference. I'm going to give that a minute or so longer, and I'm going to just chop up some celery. Got about 4 or 5 stalks of celery, and I like to keep it pretty big because it's going to cook with the roast and I don't want it to disappear. So just kind of chunk it up like that. That looks perfect. I've also got some onion already chunked up. There we go. A little more oil at the bottom of that pan just to get it browning. And that color is flavor, and it's yummy and wonderful. And if you have any good basic recipes, by the way, let me know about them. Don't keep them a secret. Email me them to me, or any great pot roast recipes. Even the kids, my kids love a good pot roast. I mean, who doesn't? It's like comfort food, right? Can't go wrong with that. Okay, so we've got some nice color on that roast. And at this point, I'm actually going to get it out of the pan and onto a plate, and I'm going to get some more flavor into this roast. I'm going to do a little more oil, and I'm actually going to take the time and quickly get some onions. Got one big onion that we've chunked up, and get that celery in there and give it some really great flavor too. Using kind of the drippings from the pan, I want a little color on that. I want to get it caramelized. That's what we're looking for. I'm going to season those veggies with some salt and pepper, and this is that great mixture that we use. 1 cup of kosher salt and 1 tablespoon of coarsely ground black pepper. Keep that by your stove, and whenever you need to season things, it's the perfect mix right there. So see how those veggies, this pan is really nice and hot, and they're just getting the onions and the celery, getting a little bit of color, which is flavor. Okay, speaking of flavor, I talked about what we're going to cook this beef in. I mean, it's a big pot roast. Pot roasts take at least 3 or 4 hours, maybe even longer than that, depending on your size of roast. So they need to braise in a wonderful liquid. instead of using water, you want to crank it up a notch and make a really good pot roast. First of all, we're going to use a little bit of wine, either a dry red or a dry white wine. Just depends what kind of flavor you're looking for. You know, when you're coming into the winter months and it's cold and chilly, you might want to, do a red. This is a Cabernet or a Pinot Noir works great. So 1 cup. But sometimes if you don't have it, or you're feeling a little bit lighter, a dry white wine like a Chardonnay or a Pinot Grigio would work. You don't want to do a sweet wine. You want to do something dry. So just, ask in the liquor department, and you don't have to get a big expensive bottle. You can even use those little bottles. Now I'm going to do about 3 cups of beef stock, and I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. 1, 2, 3. And what we did is, well, first of all, I love the stock in a box. I grew up with, again, bouillon cubes and bouillon granules and things like that. We didn't have all this great stuff. And then, it moved on to beef broth or chicken broth. Well, now, this is like the real deal. This is actually cooked beef, with veggies and things like that. And it's so yummy. And it comes in a box, so when you only need a certain amount and you got some left over, just put the top on and get it into the fridge, and it'll last for another week or so. So this is great. You don't have to use it all like a can. Once it's opened, you really have to use it all. So this stuff works great. So basically 3 cups of beef stock and 1 cup of dry either white or red wine, and I put that in there with the vegetables and those great drippings from the roast, and this is going to just be really, really flavorful. So back goes our roast into our pan, and anything that's accumulated on that plate dripping wise. And then basically you cover this, because this pan can go right in the oven just like this, and let it cook low and slow. I like to do my pot roast at about 325, 350, and again, it all depends on the size of the roast in your oven, but about 3 hours total time. Now about 2 hours into it is when I'm going to start adding the rest of the veggies. I don't want to add the potatoes and the carrots and things right at the beginning, because they'll disappear on you and they get overcooked, they'll get mushy. So I like to put the potatoes and the carrots in about an hour before, 45 minutes to an hour before the roast is done. So we're going to get this off the heat, and I am going to, thank you, Ann, cover it with foil, get it in the oven. And we're going to take a look at the roast that we have in here and then finish it off and make a really rich, wonderful gravy. Okay, so let's get back to the roast that we've had in the oven for a few hours. And then we added the vegetables, the potatoes and the carrots. And because we took the time to brown it, it just has a great color. And you can see, I don't even know if you can see this, but the drippings just look so rich instead of just doing water. It really just does make a difference to use wine and that beef stock instead of water. So I'm going to take some of these drippings, and they're great as is, don't get me wrong. This would be great just to serve it more of an au jus type of a light gravy, but I just want to talk to you a minute about how to make a little bit thicker gravy, the basics of gravy 101. And this is how I do it at home. First of all, I'm going to get that roast over to a platter, and you can see it's already just fallen apart. Looks so good. Now, let's say you don't have wine, or you don't want to cook with wine. Not a big deal. Just use all stock. You could also do a little beer in there. You can use non-alcoholic wine, or leave it out altogether. I get questions about that all the time. Wow. See how it's just kind of fallen apart on me? That is all goodness. These potatoes look perfect, Ann. Are you getting hungry? And the carrots, see, they kind of keep their shape, which is nice. That's why we put those in later. You could also cook this roast in a slow cooker, but again, boy, taking the time to brown it and season it real well, especially when it goes in the slow cooker, you got to season it well and use some great liquids other than water. Just makes all the difference in the world. So this is how I do my roast. I take it to the table like on a big platter like this, kind of wow everybody, look like a rock star. You know me, I love to look like a rock star, right? Smells so good when everybody walks in the door. Nothing like the smell of a pot roast. We use Yukon Gold and red potatoes, a mix of both. And that's a great tip. And we chunk these potatoes up a little smaller, and that way they actually are going to cook quicker on you. So, you know, if you're really in a hurry, you come home from work and this roast is almost done, but you want to add the veggies, just cut your veggies in smaller pieces. Cut those potatoes in smaller chunks, and they'll get done quicker. Okay, so now we've got the drippings from this roast, and I'm going to add them into a saucepan, or if you had an oven-proof pan, you could just take everything out of the pan and make the gravy right in there. Either one's going to work. But a couple things I do is I take cold water, and cold water is key when it comes to making gravy. And I want to get this boiling, this stock. And then I've got a few tablespoons of flour. So sometimes the chefs, they call this a slurry. I like to use flour, not cornstarch. So a few tablespoons of flour and cold water. My kids like a thicker gravy, and so does Bob, and sometimes I do too. So it just depends whether you want to just use the drippings right from the pan or if you want to thicken it up a bit. Now the other thing that I do is, you know, and it really depends, but if you want to crank up the beefy flavor, this stuff works great. This is like a browning sauce, and you'll usually find this in the aisle where they have spices and gravy mixes and things like that. And boy, a little goes a long way. And this is going to give it a real rich color and just kind of pump up the flavor profile. It's not always, you don't need it all the time. I usually use it for sure when I'm making turkey gravy. Sometimes that can get a little lighter on you, and you want it, you know, you want it to look like turkey gravy rather than chicken gravy. It's a really great tip. So now I'm going to add in here this mixture. It's also going to stretch the gravy and give us lots of gravy. And you know what? I'm all about extra gravy. I don't know about you. And yeah, totally, no skimping on the gravy. I'm big time, and I like it nice and warm too. So what we're going to do is just let this come to a boil, and it's going to thicken right away. One of the keys is don't leave it. We've got the flour and the water in there, and we don't want lumpy gravy, right? No lumpy gravy, right? So that is one of the keys, is don't walk away and take a phone call or get on the computer or something like that. Man or woman your stove with your whisk, because this happens pretty quick. Now, if you do run into some gravy problems, first of all, taste. Always taste. You can season with salt and pepper. You can always add, if it gets too thick on you, add more stock. Too thin, make another one of those slurry mixtures that we did with the flour and the water. Just not feeling the flavor, try adding more of that browning sauce. And if you do get lumps, try putting it in the blender. Be very careful though with hot liquids, but that can also work. So that's a little tip for you. But you can see this is just about to, the minute it starts simmering, it's going to thicken up and kind of coat the back of the spoon, and then we've got gravy. So it's just, you know, taking the time to brown your pot roast, taking the time to actually have a nice braising liquid. Seasoning the meat is key. Don't forget, those roasts really shrink on you. I always go for a bigger roast because I'm a big fan of leftovers, and I hate it when you know, you've got a big piece of meat and then after you cook it for hours it shrinks down and you don't have enough for leftovers. You don't have enough to make soup or hot roast beef sandwiches the next day. So sometimes I'll even buy 2 of them. So that's another one of my tips. So this is starting to do its thing, and you can see already how nice and thick that is. So there you go. Here's my pot roast, and there's my gravy, and I can hardly wait to dig in. Recipe, by the way, is on our website.